Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
Welcome to Let's Take This Outside, the best of 2024. It's Marianne, and today we are wrapping up 2024 with a look back at an incredible year of stories, discoveries, and some unforgettable moments. This year has been one for the books. We took home second place for Emerging Broadcast Media over 10 minutes from the Travel Media Association of Canada. We were also nominated for 2 Canadian Podcast Awards for Best Science Series and Best Sports Series. At this point in recording, the final awards have not been announced yet. I wanted to look back at our most successful year to date and share moments from some of my favorite interviews. From Kevin Callan talking about the joys of portaging to Megan J. Ward giving advice for adventurous parents. Let's kick things off with an award-winning documentary filmmaker, Deanne Whelan. In August 2021, she completed the land and water trails of the 24,000-kilometer Trans-Canada Trail and is the first person and woman to do so. The journey has been turned into a film, 500 Days in the Wild, which you can now watch on Paramount Plus Canada. Deanne and I talked about connecting to nature on her journey. Something that really spoke to me that's also a common theme in this podcast is your connection to nature. We've talked about it a little bit, but you said something in the film, you did say it quickly as well here, that humans only make up, I don't remember what the exact number was, but
I think it's 0.001%
of life on Earth. And you were there to connect with the other 99.99%, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I did. I mean, again, that connection to nature has always been there, and we're so afraid of it, but nature is going home. It's where we're from. If you're alive today, we all have amnesia, so none of us can do this, but like you could connect your own line back to the beginning of time, right? It's human time. If you're alive today, you're like, that's it, right? We are connected to the past and we are tomorrow's ancestors. So anyway, that nature thing was alive in me as a child, but I think it's alive in all of us. It's like it's just sleeping in your DNA. And if you put yourself out there, it starts to wake up. Like there's a natural kind of rhythm to it that you do start to adapt to. And life becomes quite simple, right? It's about finding water, feeding yourself. Self-care is like, it's so interesting. Like the more extreme the journey, the more important the self-care actually is, even though they're not necessarily synonymous. We think about pushing our limits all the time, but on a journey where it's endurance, it's not speed, it's one of length and time, your capacity to you break life back down to the very basics, and you have to look after all of those things. And then it's whatever you get done in terms of mileage today. But you can't skimp on feeding yourself or looking after your gear or because they would, you never know when something's going to go sideways. So you always need to be looking after everything. You never work yourself to the point of utter exhaustion, because it could be at that point something goes sideways and now you have no resources to deal with the situation you're in. So it's about adapting that mentality. But anyway, living with nature, and certainly that connection grew as I spent time in Indigenous communities. I found community and really resonated with some of the ways that they connect with nature, for sure. And the respect and reverence for it, but it's always been a part of me, and you can see it, I was talking to the frogs. I was talking to the butterflies. I was talking to the dragonflies were my Jedi warriors. They were the ones killing the mosquitoes. But the more time I spent out there, I could feel a shift in something, I guess you could call resonance. The more comfortable I became, the less fear, because a lot of it was confronting fears at first, right? Fear of being alone, a woman, and nature. And I wasn't afraid of the bears. I was afraid of man, and over time and meeting different people, building that trust, because everybody as different as we were. I always like to joke, people never asked you, are you liberal or conservative or NDP? Like it was irrelevant what your politics are out there. It's just, you could be very different, but the fact that you all find yourself in that same space in the woods is enough to share. Like whether someone's on an ATV and you're on a backpack, there's still something calling you to being out there, whether it's the love of fishing or being in nature and hearing the sounds. And so you find what you share. And that's one of the things I love about it. But yeah, I was never alone. It was the most common question I was asked was, don't you get alone out there? And no, because I had this connection with nature and I was talking with it and being with, I never did. I never got alone at all.
Next, James Appleton is the host of the 46 of 46 podcast, an outdoor storytelling podcast based in the largest protected wilderness area in the continental U.S., the Adirondack Park. James is also a New York State licensed guide for hiking and camping, and this episode was quite selfish as it's my favorite place to adventure close to my home in Ottawa. It's only a few hours drive from both Ottawa and Montreal, and James talked about the Adirondacks being a very welcoming place for Canadians. I do want to ask, though, because I kind of want to share my experience, too, of my first time in the Adirondacks. But how many Canadians do you... Because every time I go, like half the parking lot is Quebec or Ontario plates. A lot of your listeners must be Canadian, I would think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like the Lake Placid Niner, probably like 15, 20% of finishers are Canadian.
Wow.
So a good amount. Like every batch I have to put at least 1 or 2 Canadian stamps out there. Like, no, it's a very, I mean, we're like you said, we're 2 hours south of Montreal. So this is a big hub in terms of bringing Canadians in. And then like out where you are in Ottawa, like you're not very far from the blue line. Like you're a little further from Lake Placid, but like to actually get in the park, like that old Forge area, I think would be much closer to you than Lake Placid.
When you're driving from Ottawa specifically, you're kind of just going through like rolling back country roads. And then you get to a point and you just know, A, there's a smell, and B, you can tell by the trees. Sure. There's like this certain part of the road because you're coming from west, you're going east, and you're driving into the park. The trees get higher, they're pine, they're skinnier trees, and then you can smell the pine as you're coming in. That's how I know I'm there. And then you start to see the rolling hills become rolling mountains. Yeah. Right. So I know that feeling. And so when you're describing it's a place, the first time I was in Lake Placid, I was actually training for Kilimanjaro. And they're like, we're going to do Mount Marcy as a training hike. So Mount Marcy, which is the biggest high peak, not the hardest, but the biggest high peak, was my first mountain, which was an exceptional experience. And I've been coming back since. But for me, it is my safe place. Like after I went through a big breakup, I go there. It's my safe place. I go alone a lot. I did most of the high peaks alone. It is like my safe place. It makes me emotional. It feels like home away from home because I've been there so many times. And at this point, I'm only halfway done the 46ers, but I usually just go now. Like I'm going for a cycling trip next time I go. Half the time I go now, it's not even to do a 46er. It's just to go, enjoy, see what the weather's like, hike, maybe cycle. Like, honestly, now I just go for enjoyment and I know I'll get the 46 done at some point.
Sure. You're just kind of immersing yourself in the park. And like, that's exactly what people say. Like, it feels like they're home away from home. It just feels like this other area that they can't really like describe. And very much that whole, if you know, it's very much kind of that sort of mentality because it's hard to articulate the emotions that it does bring out of people. And I think part of that is, yes, the fresh mountain air, the views, the fact that it is somewhat secretive, like people don't know about it, but yet it's the biggest protected wilderness in the United States. It's bigger than every national park. It's just like, it's this huge part of New York State that no one thinks about. So it is like, there is kind of a secret element to it. Even, people in the Northeast don't know about it. If you know, and you're kind of obsessed with it. And I think that's part of why so many people take this like ownership of it. And I love that when people say like it's a home away from home for them, because they take that ownership of it. And to me, that's, okay, we have more advocates for the protection of this place that we all love. And I just happen to be able to call it home. And again, like, it feels like a different place than when I grew up. Like it's a totally different place to me now, despite having grown up in this town. It doesn't feel the same because an entire, just world of adventure was unlocked for me by, being able to actually experience it now and experience it without feeling like death, if that makes sense.
I then spoke with Kevin Callan, the author of 18 books, including the best-selling The Happy Camper and his incredibly popular series of paddling guides. Kevin talks about the joys of portaging in our beautiful country. I need someone else to bring me to go canoeing or portaging because the idea of portaging in like Algonquin Park sounds actually kind of amazing to me. But it's also like I don't have a canoe. I don't have a lot of the things that require it, right?
It's one of those things where I tell people all the time, you can try and convince someone to go on a canoe trip, but once you start explaining it, they look at you like, are you crazy? You're going to carry how much on the portage? There's going to be bugs. There might be bears, the bad weather. But you really do have to take them by the ear and take them on the trip. And then at least go for more than 5 days. Don't go one night for your very first time because it's just like, you won't get it. You won't get it. But by day 5, you're finally sleeping at night because the bear hasn't killed you yet. Right? So you're like, I'm not worried about the bear anymore because it hasn't killed me yet. And then by day 10, you don't even know it's day 10. You don't count the days after that. I remember my daughter, she was, we paddled across Algonquin Park when she was 8 years old. It took us 12 days. And I remember, I think it was day 8, but she was there with a cut off blue jeans and t-shirt. And these guys, come up to her and they're in full military outfit. They weren't in the military though. They were just dressed like they were in the military.
Okay.
And they look at her and they're like, how long you been out for, little girl? And Kirsch goes, I have no idea what day it is. I don't know. And she goes, how long are you out for? She goes, and they're like, we're out. And they had that like the big Bowie knife down to past their knee, right? They're that type of person, right? Well, we're out here surviving for 2 nights.
Oh my gosh.
And my 8-year-old daughter goes, yeah, you better get out more.
We're surviving. You're like, that's not.
Yeah, because I thrive out there. I don't survive. The happy camper doesn't survive out there, right? I bring good food, good whiskey, a good chair, that sort of thing. If you try to survive, you will, but then you go on to your next thing, right? Canoe tripping to me, time in wilderness is not the next thing. It's my life.
Hiking's my first love, so I understand. I get the like bugs. I get the connection to nature. I like being in the middle of nowhere. But there's something about portaging that brings you places that hiking actually can't bring you.
Well, portaging to me is well, actually, to me, backpacking is the longest portage ever created. As you're carrying your load all the time.
Hilarious, actually. Yeah.
I do like backpacking. I take a lot of students on backpacking trips now because it's so difficult now for administration to allow them to go canoeing. It's so frustrating for anybody out there that teaches any educational program, taking students outdoors. It's like a bubble, right? Oh, things might go wrong. And yet going backpacking, they haven't stopped me yet because, I do remember once though, the one program that the administrator said, okay, we can't go canoeing. Well, I'm going to take them backpacking. Well, you have to prove to us that, you can handle a bear. So I think it was a 5-page report I had to write about how I can handle a bear. During that time, true story, if you go back in time, it was on the news, global news. It was in Cobourg, and this black bear went across the football field of Cobourg High School to go to the McDonald's back to get all the food, right? So they saw this. So they shut the entire school down. There was a lockdown. A helicopter hovered over the bear. The OPP shot the bear dead. And it was all on news, right? And of course, I came back and I went to the administrator. I went, can you write me a report to show me how you can handle a bear? And she goes, are you trying to make a point? Yes, I am, because we had no problems with the bears where we were, but you obviously did.
Because you handle that differently.
Oh my! And what I was trying to get at is like, it's everywhere you go. You can't put them on a bubble all the time. So.
Let's Take This Outside now has a newsletter. Keep up to date with outdoor news, events, and great discount codes and deals from our partners. Sign up today at letstakethisoutside.ca.
This was one of the most in-depth and emotional podcasts of the year, and that's with Megan J. Ward, an outdoor travel and adventure writer based in Banff, a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and the author of Lights to Guide Me Home. Megan and her husband, photographer Paul Zizka, have had lots of experience with their kids in the wilderness and wanted to pass those lessons on. Do you have any advice for parents who do want to travel with their children, or maybe they're pregnant and they want to live this life that you and Paul had imagined before having your first?
The big takeaway from me was I spent a lot of time thinking and planning before I even met my child. And like, think of it as if you were going traveling with another adult who was a total stranger. Like, there's very little that you would just be able to assume or that you would feel comfortable planning without getting to know them. And babies are no different. They come with a personality and preferences and needs that some other babies don't have. So I think just wait until you know what you're working with before you start thinking too big or going too far down that rabbit hole. So that would be one piece. And I think the biggest advice I have is just to build things incrementally. And a lot of people look at some of the things that we do and they say, like, I could never do that. But it's because we're already comfortable with these things just for ourselves. And so if you've never been camping, camp close to home for the first time with your kid.
Like in your backyard, right?
Totally. No, absolutely. Keep it super close to home before you go into even a drive-in campground, or before you do a week-long road trip, drive the next town over and see how that goes, and then go a little bit longer. It's just to say, like, kind of up the adventure quotient over time, which allows you to adapt and refine your systems. Like, now we're so dialed for our trips with our kids, whether it's hiking or traveling abroad. We have these systems in place. I know exactly what I need for this stage. I know what I don't need anymore because, okay, there's no diapers. Now we're here. But I'm just not biting off more than I can chew anymore. Whereas that was definitely my mistake at the beginning. And I guess, there's so much advice that I'd love to give, but the third piece, I think part of it was I'm so fortunate to have a partner in the mix, and just really learning to pass the baton and share the load rather than doing everything together. It's very difficult to travel and get any alone time or time to go enjoy certain things when you're trying to do it all together all the time. And so I think it's healthy to like spell each other off a little bit and kind of build that into your itineraries and just really work as a team that way. It was ultimately the answer to us starting to enjoy our trips more. So I might escape to a cafe to write for a little bit. Sometimes it's only an hour in 3 weeks, but it's something. And so that would be the third piece.
I also talked to Megan's husband, Paul Ziska, an award-winning mountain landscape and adventure photographer. His pictures are stunning. Paul's images have been featured on countless book covers. I'm sure you've seen them before, in a variety of highly regarded publications like National Geographic, Outside Magazine, Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. I did ask Paul about the reality of being a full-time wildlife photographer and a parent. Yeah, I think a lot of people could look at your life, Paul, and say, this guy is living a dream. This guy is living my dream. But, as a freelancer and a business owner myself, I know it's not just, this cut and dry thing and you put the images up and life is good and you sell and you make all this money. Like, I know you are very grateful for what you have, but what is the reality of being a full-time photographer with a family, always traveling?
It's quite a balancing act for sure. And we've been performing that act for 11 years now with the kids. And some days I think we do really well. And some days a few balls get dropped and we feel we wish we could just start the day over and try it again, sort of thing. But I think overall we're doing better and better in managing things. And the girls are getting a little bit older too. But it's of course, I think in this day and age of social media, it's a very curated version of our lives that we put online, and its reality is very, very different. There's a lot of moments that happen behind the scenes. They're not glamorous at all, that they're just the struggle. And there's a lot of parts of photography that I enjoy, but there's some parts of it that I could do without for sure. And those are not the parts that I celebrate online, that I put out there for people to see. And so I think now that we've had social media part of our lives for so long, I think the vast majority of people understand now that it's like such a small glimpse of your existence that you put out there, and that there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into those images. And it's quite a balancing act, but I think it's so rewarding at the same time.
Speaking in the terms of, blood, sweat, and tears, you have photographed in some of the most remote places in the world. Do you have any memorable moments where things got a little dicey that people didn't see, or that maybe you're worried for your life? Megan hinted at this portrait you got of Mount Robson. And is there any moments that you can recall that got pretty dicey and you were pretty scared?
In hindsight, there's definitely a lot of moments that kind of reveal themselves as, I would say, close calls, probably. And I think I work in environments that are pretty fickle, where things can go south pretty quickly. Things can get desperate fairly quickly when something goes sideways. You can go from having just an amazing day out to having a very stressful day out in a matter of minutes. Canadian Rockies, the vertical world, not all vertical worlds are falling apart the way that the Rockies do. It's a very Rockies are a place that of just immeasurable beauty, but also it's a place that's just crumbling before our eyes, and that's where I do the bulk of my work. So sometimes it's a place where you don't really know how close you are to catastrophe. It's just, so I think there's probably been some luck involved over the years, but also I think especially when I started getting into hiking, scrambling, mountaineering, there's some images that I look at that probably weren't worth the amount of risk that I took, but that was unbeknownst to me at that time, right? So I think we all have, regardless of the discipline we're in, we look at our early days, especially in mountain environments, and we're like, wow, I can't believe we just put ourselves in that position. I'd like to think we're a bit more reasonable now, for sure. And I think with the kids being around, I'm a lot more, my sphere of accessible risk has gotten a little bit smaller, for sure. But there's been moments over the years where I think just places like they're extremely remote, like you said, like Greenland or Antarctica, where if something goes, it doesn't take like a huge mishap for things to get desperate pretty quickly. But overall, frankly, I've been very, very fortunate in over the course of my career. I can't really point to a moment where I felt like, this is it. That's a testament to how fortunate I've been over the course of all those adventures.
Finally, I talked to fellow creator Sarah Christie. Sarah created the eco-conscious interview series Earth Care. Sarah cares deeply about our planet and shared some aha moments on her show, including the tumultuous fight against Premier Doug Ford and hands off the Greenbelt. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Do you have any favorite guests that were kind of aha moments or conversations that you had that were maybe changed your perspective, or again back to the mind-blowing moments?
Literally every conversation. And I say that, no, but I'll tell you some specifics, but truly, because this has selfishly been such an incredible learning experience of just doing a 180 with my mindset, the way I go about most things in life. But recently, I'm sure you're familiar with hands off the Greenbelt. What was our provincial government was trying to, sell land on the Greenbelt for housing development. So I started interviewing just a ton of people who were actively opposing it, but I interviewed farmers, I interviewed community developers, community planners, I interviewed the former mayor of Toronto, and those were, I think, such impactful conversations just to understand how quickly we can be lied to and how it can be so effortlessly covered up unless you really do the research and, dig a bit deeper, which isn't always easy. So my goal is, okay, maybe you don't have time to do all the research and read through these huge policies. Instead, here's a 10-minute podcast to give you a different perspective. I'm not saying necessarily that everything I learn or say is right, but I'm trying to learn with you. And that's the whole goal of Earth Care, is that we're in this together. We should be fighting the same fight here because we all live here.
I was going to say, I don't get too political on this show sometimes, but I think it's pretty obvious what I care about. But do you feel justified in how the Greenbelt thing ended and where it's going and how they're looking into it? Is there any justification with that for you?
Yes and no. I think it was a huge win and a huge testament to the power of us, of us raising our voice, because it can feel so okay, I signed a petition, didn't hear back. Now what? I went to this rally, now what? And it can feel very isolating and paralyzing when you actually read about the facts. But these people in Parliament who led this great walkout back in 2020, trying to, raise some red flags about what was happening to our Greenbelt. This is 3 years later. So it's such a testament to commitment, the power of numbers, and literally just believing in your voice. And so there obviously are other things that are not great that are happening. Highway 413 is a great example of that, because that's building over Indigenous land, that's building over conservation land. So there are other things that definitely need our voices to back and some more research, but it is really empowering to see that it's not wasted efforts, and when you hear people saying we need everyone, that's not a lie.
I love that we got political, but any other non-political things that you learned from people and guests that you really remember that you want to share?
Well, yeah, I mean, so simple. And these are the things that I finished the interview and go, why aren't we all talking about this? So I had an interview with early in the stages of Earth Care about someone who was talking about just fixing and upcycling things before buying new. And it was so simple. Just the idea of, okay, well, your socks have holes in them. Have you learned how to darn them back together? Or can you collect them and maybe use them for another purpose? For instance, to divert them from a landfill, because it takes natural resources to make everything, and our natural resources are finite. So this cycle of just, well, it's kind of broken, so I'm just going to get rid of it and get a new one. Eventually we will run out of things to make new. So those cold stoppers, cold air blockers that you put in front of a door?
No, describe it to me.
Okay, so it's just a log of material. I don't know. You put it in front of the bottom of a door to block the draft.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I grew up in a really old house, so we always had them growing up, but I'm currently living in an old house, so all of the doorways are pretty drafty. And so I've been saving all of my socks with holes in them to just fill this material that I stitched together and put it in front of a door. And now it blocks the draft. And, you save money on your heat bill. You save electricity because you don't have to pump the heat as much. And it's just, that conversation was just examples of that. And it was just so simple, but not things we talk about in a simple way. And we don't talk about them often. It's usually what's on sale. Black Friday is coming up. What are you going to be buying? And, I think the times are extremely expensive right now. So everybody's looking to save money, and Black Friday is a great opportunity to do that. But this buying for the sake of buying is, at some point has to just break that cycle. And this idea of repairing and upcycling is there for us to just lean into.
Thank you for joining me on this special episode of Let's Take This Outside, the best of 2024. It's been an incredible year filled with unforgettable moments, inspiring stories, and so many adventures. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to follow the show, leave a review, and share this episode with friends and on social media. Your support makes all of this possible, and I cannot wait to bring you more stories in 2025.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letstakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.